Welcome! Today we're going to be looking in detail at the map Queensdale, collecting a speedy 100% completion while we're at it. The footage of this clear has been submitted to me by TechZoon, and we'll see what there is to talk about as we go. Queensdale is one of my favourite maps in the whole game. I guess to some people it's going to look like a boring map, since it is, for many of us, our starter map. You know, the majority of people play humans start here, but it holds a very special place in my heart because it was some of the first content I ever saw from Guild Wars 2. This was one of just two maps that was released in the very original 2010 Gamescom convention demos. And in fact, the studio also revealed over time that this was the first map they ever made, really. They did like a little, what they call vertical slice, I think, of what Guild Wars 2's gameplay would be like, and it included just these very opening regions. In fact, if you watch the original reveal trailer for Guild Wars 2, it kind of opens up, after giving us a ton of concept art, it kind of opens up showing right away, what do you guess, Queensdale, the view of Divinity's Reach, sitting up there at the village of Shaymore, which is where we very first begin. The concept art kind of blends away into the city. So in many ways, this really is the beginning. I remember when I was very much into data mining and exploring unreleased maps, they had like 5 or 6 different versions of just this opening section of Queensdale in the data, which I'm guessing is because of them iterating on it and, you know, really trying to figure out what the game was going to be like, how it would end up working. It's a pretty interesting place as far as Guild Wars 1 is concerned too, so I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to do this in the series, but for a while I wanted to run along in Guild Wars 1 at the same time as talking to you guys about the Guild Wars 2 maps. We could do a bit of a picture-in-picture thing, but here's the thing, Guild Wars 1 is so much bigger and tougher to traverse than Guild Wars 2, that it's like impossible to keep up. It really is. There's just so many areas. But of course, Shaymore did appear in the original game also, a little bit into one of the main campaign missions, Divinity Coast. And in fact, you guys can check out here, this is that shaman's historical guide to Tyrian that really gives you a sense of just how many regions there were here in Guild Wars 1 that we're traveling through. The aesthetic of the place has changed a lot. It's no longer swampy, it's no longer particularly tropical. I guess the devs decided that they wanted to repurpose the Guild Wars 2 human starting area into something more, you know, traditional green, verdant, human-y fantasy. Since this was the only place humans were going to be now, the Char would be inhabiting Ascalon and so on and so forth. I do kind of miss some of that old stuff, some of the big old beaches and whatnot, but I think they did a very good job here too. Like, for example, where we're currently exploring this dam, there's nothing on this scale in Guild Wars 1 whatsoever. The dam itself, and it's kind of cool to see that we're going here first. Usually on my own gameplay, I save the dam for last, but I suppose it is more efficient to do this route if you're going for a quick map completion. But yeah, the dam itself is one of like 5 hearts that we find at the very beginning of the map, which all represent super easy mode, super early game, low level objectives. This one, we break rocks, we kill earth elementals. There is actually a couple of... The dynamic event density in this area of the map is very high. And there's a couple of events here that I always look out for if I'm going to explore this place. One of them is a giant rock elemental that I'd like to fight. And there's one dealing with harpies too. What a lot of people don't know about the harpy event in this section is that while it's going on, the devs actually add a visual effect way above the dam in an area you could never really explore that shows a ton of harpies swarming around. And in that way, people from really far away can see that there's an event happening and can go for it. There was an interview way back when, right around launch, where the devs talked about the new dynamic event system and how they were going to telegraph players to know that events were happening. And they were playing with, you know, like fires being off in the distance so you could see the smoke really far away. And they kind of ended up not doing much of that. They ended up relying on the user interface more than anything else. The idea of renown hearts got implemented and so on. But that one harpy event up at the dam always makes me think of it, because clearly that was from that time where they were looking at different ways to telegraph to people, hey, an event's going on. So this orchard's quite interesting from a Guild Wars 1 perspective. This was actually the location of a whole village called Lomehurst. So in the Divinity Coast mission, first you visit Shaymore, which is still here 250 years later, and then you travel along a really long winding road and eventually end up at like a coastal town called Lomehurst that's right on the coast of a big lake, which we can now see in Guild Wars 2 they've dammed. But Loamhurst isn't there in the sequel. It's just an orchard, just one orchard. And that's a good representation right off the bat of something I'm sure I'll talk a lot about as we go through the maps of the game. Just how the scale of the two games changed so much. You know, in one game it's a whole village, in the other it's a collection of trees. And what is a fun heart, I like killing the spiders there and so on. The Spider Queen event can spawn. It's very weird going back in 2020 and looking at how the game's played in terms of how quick stuff is dying. Obviously, we are running through on a higher level character here, but not a super higher level character. We're only level 20. We shouldn't be that power crept. We don't have our elite unlocked and so far, and so on, but we will pretty much just slaughter our way through whatever we want. So yeah, moving down to the south now, we have probably the longest of these opening hearts. This is Cassie at the Moa Ranch. I've never really known my favorite way of doing this. I guess coming into the cave and just killing creatures tends to be the best thing. I've always regretted that about the Renown Hearts. We're going to see that over and over and over again as we experience the open world. But the idea that there are actually nuanced, fun, weird things to do, but killing is the best way forwards, nearly always. And I've always kind of rebelled against that. I know that other players are in the reverse, the opposite direction, where they get so conditioned and so relaxed about just being able to kill things that when they're suddenly presented with a heart where they can't just kill things, they get really frustrated. Like later, we'll see in the Blood-Tide Coast, there's a heart where you have to mix potions. And that actually requires reading and comprehension and engaging your brain, not just running around spamming skills and everything dies and you get the hearts for free. And people hate that. And in a weird way, I love that one because, it changes the format. It's something new and interesting, you know. So yeah, as a Mesmer, we can do interesting things with Portal here. I guess on this one, we'll go into the central platform, hit the Vista, return with the portal. Again, this location, I remember at launch, I have so many memories of struggling with this cave. These bandits really felt like a tier up. And they are a higher level. I guess maybe I came here at a lower level. There's also a pretty cool event where you run in there and you free a man from the cage. Sort of escape, and I think that spawned back at launch a champion boss. That was one of the first champions you could interact with. Nowadays I think it's just a veteran. It's all been sort of smoothed down, so it's all the same sort of banal experience. Another thing that I remember about that cave too, and look at how cool this is as well, that there's secret entrances in some of the buildings, like in that windmill. Actually that's not a windmill, that's just a house. The other cool thing about that cave is that near the cage in the center of it, there used to be an additional lore pickup for an old bestiary feature that the devs were playing with, but never finished up. I think you could unlock it like a bestiary entry there that would teach you about the bandits, and maybe it would give you a skill point at the same time too. Not sure. Here, by the way, this pipe for Guild Wars 1, this is where the Divinity Coast actually starts. So anyone who's seen my Guild Wars 1 series or played that game and you know the Divinity Coast entrance, it's right there on that pipe. It's very, very weird. We're like at the mission outpost here. But something weird is going to happen in terms of how the two games overlap now. In Guild Wars 1, you could not go directly south of the Divinity Coast. You'd get marched around through all these other maps, the Watchtower Coast and so on. In Guild Wars 2, it's now just become all these big open fields and we can come directly south. We can come to the trading post heart here. Which means that you can't really follow along. And again, I was going to do a version of this video where I was following along, but I was constantly having moments like this, where it's like, this was not playable in the original game, in any way. And now it's just, you know, big open fields. This was always a weird heart, run along, just hit the stakes. This is totally how I do it too. I'm quite happy to see TechZines doing the same thing, because it feels certainly the most efficient, just walk along. I mean, you do get the idea of rezzing these guys, which gives you progress as well. So make sure that you stop to do that. I know it sort of seems like a slowdown because it takes longer to res someone than just press F and destroy some stakes. But you got to remember, you're going to run out of stakes and not necessarily be complete. Another useful thing you can do here is around the trading post itself, which we haven't visited just yet. You can keep to the shallow waters and kill the scale around there. In fact, killing scale there is something I spent a long time on at one point in the game for the achievement Scale Slayer, because there's just so many, and especially if you can get one of the events to trigger where you make an omelette. I think that's slightly outside of heart range, but if you go there, you could get an almost endless supply of the things. I mean, at the kill speed that we've got now, maybe they would run out. But back in the day, it was that you could kill scale, and new ones would be respawning by the time you'd cleared everything that was on the screen, so that's quite nice. So yeah, I guess we haven't actually finished this heart. A lot of this is going to be new for me, guys, the exact route that we're taking here. I guess we haven't finished that heart. We'll return there later. That's nice to see us waving to people. Help someone out with a hero challenge. Again, a little bit of a tricky one. I always get a bit confused in this area of Queensdale because there's 2 hero challenges right nearby, right? One is with the bandits, and the others, there's some wolves that you can fight. And I always kind of get confused. I think the wolves are going to be the heart, but they're not. And again, over into this area, this is actually a little bit of a disappointment for me as far as Guild Wars 1 versus Guild Wars 2 is concerned. So this is the very bottom left corner of the Divinity Coast, which was actually a special place in the original game for Guild Wars 2. So after the original game was pretty much all said and done, the devs started doing some post-release updates called Guild Wars Beyond. And in Guild Wars Beyond, they introduced the idea that some Asura would be studying and working near to the humans at a laboratory that they'd established. And in this laboratory, you could see that they were working on one of the ancient races of the world. They were like doing a dissection of its body, an ancient seer. That was a really nice portal there as well. All we have to do is drink the thing for the hero challenge, so you just got to pick it up. So there was a laboratory here in Guild Wars 1, and it was a laboratory added to the story specifically to kind of reference Guild Wars 2. And yeah, when we come here, this is the place pretty much right here. There is no laboratory in Guild Wars 2. You can't see it, and you would have thought that the devs would have, for something like that, really put the extra effort in and made sure that the lab appeared. There are obviously the cave networks around there. Kind of not necessary as far as map completion's going, especially if you're doing it as fast as possible. So over here, I remember during the old conventions, there was a very rare stream the devs did in which they demoed the ranger profession. And the ranger wasn't really being shown during that first year, that first convention, but they logged in on it and they showed some of the old ground target effects and short bow skills and so on, and they actually staged that demo on that roof where that vista is now. That's where it opened up as far as I remember. And so it was really cool as a stream because it was showing a kind of out of the way part of Queensdale. All of Queensdale was available for exploration in those early demos, but most people spent, you know, their time in the early game bits because they were low level. The demo only lasted 40 minutes, then you had to leave and someone else in the queue would get to take your station. So the odds of someone getting to the very bottom left corner were low. And I guess the devs kind of knew that, so they managed to stage that, which was really quite entertaining, something that I enjoyed a lot. So here we're now at Claypool. Claypool didn't exist in Guild Wars 1. This kind of popped up for the sequel. This serves as, you're going to see, each of the starter maps has a settlement or an outpost where you can craft at, like deeper into the game, which is a cool idea. The truth is that the way that waypoints and stuff work, I think most players don't really take advantage of it. But if you want, you can come here and do some crafting. And one of the things that really captured me on my initial playthrough back in 2012 was gathering materials and seeing what I could craft them into via discovery recipes. And I remember being really, really, really engaged with the RPG right at the time I got to Claypool. I mean, it's so well realized. It's got a beautiful heart here where there's all these different training exercises you can do. So here we get the sniper one where we hold and we release the second the NPC says fire. Like, this is some quality that you don't actually see the devs go for too much, even in recent patches. The more modern content doesn't tend to do stuff like this. Now, way later in the Living Worlds, there is a Living World episode that takes us back to Kryta where they kind of rehash some of these, which is cool. But they never built new stuff on this level, you know, where you've really got that beautiful integration of interesting mechanics. You're picking up a temporary item, you know, the actual execution of things, like actually having to block at the right time, but also that immersive factor where you have to listen to the NPCs speak, or you have to really watch what they're doing, because this guy's like fairly unpredictable, right? He kind of is somewhat predictable for 2 cycles, and then he becomes unpredictable again. If you're really trying to power game this, the fastest way is to do the shield block exercise. If you stand there and you can really get used to the fact of when he's going to retarget, and you know you have low latency and you're comfortable with that, blocking that dude's attacks is definitely the best way to go. But here I love that we're demonstrating each of the different methods. I think this is really nice. And I want to be clear as well, the speed at which you can see these videos will be going through the open world maps is actually much faster than I ever really do them. I'm much more casual and relaxed about it. I'm not saying that this is like a super speed run and that everyone should follow this exact route. This is the definitive fastest way. But certainly playing a Mesmer, having access to portal and blinks and stuff like that, these are going to be nice quick runs. You're going to be able to get the full map every video, which is really nice. It's funny as well because Mesmer is kind of regarded as one of the worst leveling classes in terms of its combat capabilities. Or back in the day it used to be. Nowadays I feel like it wouldn't be a problem at all. But here, just because of its movement utility, it's actually really quite good. So yeah, Claypool, kind of a new thing that popped up. It's probably my favorite of those crafting places just because it was my first experience of getting really, really into the crafting. But even still, if you look at, say, the one in Metrica Province or the Norn area or the Char area, none of them are as cool as the one that ArenaNet built here. You know, it's a full-fledged little town. And for that, I really, really like it. Here is, of course, another big town that we'll be going to on this map. That's Beetleton. But that'll be in a little while. And Beetleton was taken forward a lot as well. You know, the location of a dungeon now. They've got all the story to do with Cordicus. None of that was there in the original game. Beetleton in the original game was really just, you know, a small, almost missable location that most players wouldn't visit. Because if you were following the main campaign, you just sort of got leapfrogged and teleported past it in some way. So we got, honestly, quite a boring heart here. Not very much going on, just kill centaur supplies. I guess for a new player, this heart would be of some interest. But the fact is that unfortunately, as the game goes along, ArenaNet really, they overuse this. They have so many areas where there's just a bunch of centaurs and some supplies and some flags to burn. And they straight up copy paste this. I mean, maybe the dialogue in the top right changes a bit. What does it say here? Defeat centaurs, destroy their holdings, and find ways to weaken their presence in the area. You know, even that is generic enough that could be anywhere. But the idea is we're helping the Seraph protect Claypool from centaurs. And so, yeah, this is actually one of my least favorite kinds of experiences we'll have out in the open world. But I suppose some people, for a lot of people actually, this is probably one of their favorites, just because you can do so much damage so quickly and kind of roll on through. So with that heart done, I guess we'll move on to the little camp. This was kind of a cool XP farm area, as far as I remember. There used to be a very regular event that would trigger here and just send hordes and waves of centaurs at us. And you could just sort of sit there, raking in a lot of XP. It was particularly nice if you were waiting for the world boss on this map to spawn, the Shadow Behemoth, or if you were too low level to actually deal with the swamp. The swamp heart is kind of very well crafted, and I guess we'll be heading there in a second. In the heart itself takes a really long time to do, and that's in the hope that players will be sticking about there more, so that when the world boss spawns, which is, you know, at fairly rare intervals, there'll be stuff happening. Now, you got to remember, as far as world boss is concerned, back at launch, in the way that this was all actually designed, world bosses were not as regular as they now are. Eventually, they moved them all onto a timer so that everyone could predict exactly when every boss spawned, and that was that. But at launch, the game was more, well, dynamic than that, and it was a little bit more of a question, would the boss actually appear and when and how? And this meta event here is, in fact, one of my favorites in the game. And when I say the meta event, I don't just mean the fight, I mean the full thing. There's a kind of a pre-stage to this fight where portals spawn spread out over the map. And nowadays, it may feel like those portals aren't very far away because people mount. And by the way, we're not mounting here. If you were mounting, you could do this a lot quicker, but we're going for something a little bit more authentic here. But, you know, you could mount and just charge over, or hell, even without mounting, there's so much mobility, power creep, and so on. You can get to them quickly. But at launch, there was a real vast sense of scale to this meta event, where you really didn't know what direction you wanted to go in to get those portals, because it was an adventure to get to the portal and break the portal, and you didn't really know what would happen. And there were 3 of those happening on the map at once. basically anything that ArenaNet did in 2012, the kind of split the Zerg into multiple different areas that traveled around the map, I really loved. Like in Ore with the Straits of Devastation, they kind of did that. In Ore at the Temple of Lissa, they kind of did that. Wherever that was a thing, I think they really hit the nail on the head. And a lot of that magic is pretty much lost now. There's a weird temporal distortion above that house now. That's new. A lot of that's kind of lost, but that is the start of the Shadow Behemoth. And I think the first time I ever did it, I went to the monastery, which was so brilliant. Maybe you guys have some fond memories of your first experience with this. I never had a like really big mind blow for this location, only because again I had absorbed so much information from the conventions and stuff before the game came out that I already knew about the Shadow Behemoth. They had been showing that off, and they'd been showing off one of the other world bosses, the Shatterer, over in Blaze Receptive as well. So I kind of had that, but I still have such fond memories of those experiences and how radical it was that when a world boss spawned, they would, you know, tweak the FOV of the game just that little bit so that now you can see a bit more and you really get a sense that, wow, I'm moving into a big battlefield. You know, the game is almost starting to feel like more of a strategy game here because there's so many players around and you're just like controlling one unit and, you know, they're giving you all of this extra vision. Especially running through the trees at like sunset here where everything's got that nice orange hue and suddenly you hear combat music and your camera pulls out a bit and you hear like a roar and you realize there's a great creature nearby if you're getting to the event late. That stuff was really, really, really awesome. And, you know, they had a slightly different design as well with world bosses back then because they didn't have to despawn after a certain amount of time, so they could linger for a long time. So that hero point there I think is really interesting, one of the more interesting notes in this map. So where are we? We're at the Temple of the Aegis. Very, very iconic location in Guild Wars 1. It's now flooded in Guild Wars 2. They don't ever give it like a really specific deep reason for that. It's just, you know, there's been many years Elder Dragon activity and the place has become neglected. It's a really cool idea to sort of have this place fall into destitution and ruin, especially with those early ideas they had of the humans losing faith in their gods and not really believing in their gods anymore. That side of the world building is kind of not emphasized much anymore, but at launch that was a big thing with the humans. And so as a player to come here where you knew that once in the original game you could commune with the avatars of the god and so on, you'll see it just fallen in such disrepair. It's a really powerful thing. For those that don't know, this is basically where a lot of this was the Guild Wars 1 equivalent of the aerodrome, let me put it that way, for Guild Wars 2 players. So imagine in a Guild Wars 3 you find a ruined aerodrome. That's basically what this is. You know, a place where once upon a time loads of players would hang out and make groups and deal with the game's coolest content, and now it's just like fallen into disrepute. I think it's really, really good. Well, not disrepute. You get what I mean. But talking specifically about the hero challenge, that's a weird one, and I actually really kind of don't like it. So the hero challenge is just one of the communes, but it describes this location as the place where time itself began, which is like a huge bombshell. You'd think that maybe I'd be really excited about it. That was a nice little distort to try and not get into combat so that the res speed wouldn't get slowed down. You would think that I'd be really excited about that because that sounds like such a big bomb, but there's really no justification for why that should be true here. There's no additional pieces of the puzzle to attach that to. Like, yeah, the Temple of the Aegis was somewhat of a special place, but are we really going to say that Tyrian is so much the de facto be-all and end-all of the whole franchise that here is allowed to be where time itself began? And so you might think, oh, is this like a case of an unreliable narrator? Or something that, you know, maybe it's just someone's opinion. Well, you could go with that, but the way it's delivered to you is as, like, disembodied flavor text from the client almost, right? Which can't really be in that position of being an unreliable narrator. Like, it's stating it as this definitive thing, but it's not justifying anyway. So I really don't like that. And the devs, unsurprisingly perhaps, have never gone to further expand on why that is written that way. Some would say this is a retcon, right? But I would be 100% happy to see a game patch in 2020 that just changed that flavor text, really. I mean, a lot of people would think it's pointless and stupid and so on, but I would be happy. I would eat that retcon wholeheartedly because I just think it really tampers with everything, and for like no real payoff or reason. I really don't like it. So anyway, yeah, as you can see, we are spending a long time in the swamp. This is what I was talking about. It's not going to be clear to people anymore, I don't think. But the idea is that on average, more people would be in this area so that when the boss spawned, they'd be ready to fight it. And also, I guess there's a side of this which is they really want a lot of value out of the big badass stuff that they do in the game. So they've got all these amazing animations and music and mechanics. They want a good chance that the players who are here on this map will actually be able to experience it. The whole idea of map completion is a weird one as well. And I guess at the start of the series is a good time to talk about, because for the longest time as Guild Wars 2 was in development, we're not done with the map here, no, we're going to continue along. For the longest time while Guild Wars 2 was in development, this was not a concept. There weren't vistas for the longest time. They only got added pretty late in the day. For the longest time, points of interest did not appear as grayed out icons on the map, but they were more like a special treat that would only unlock if you happened upon them. So there was like the idea of finding all the points of interest was a lot more tedious and difficult, but also a lot more gratifying. But it was okay for it to be a little bit more tedious and difficult because it wasn't a part of the core experience of the product. Map completion was not the be-all and end-all. It was just kind of, you know, a thing some players could do. And particularly if you were going to become ultra dedicated at endgame, maybe you'd do it so that you could get gifts of exploration for a legendary or something. But something quite curious happened as the game went along, and I believe it's because how robust the RPG mechanics were proved to be very weak. They started leaning into map completion, and now, and particularly by the time the game came out, it kind of had become the de facto thing to do. Like, a lot of people, when they think, I'm going to make a new character, I'm going to, you know, level, I'm going to play the game. How do you level? What are you doing while you level? Well, you're using map completion. That is your goal. Your moment-to-moment thing is zerging around. And so then the devs like pushed further and further into it. They put points of interest on the map. They added more objectives because the maps felt a bit shallow if that was the main thing you were going for. So the vistas were there. A few years after release, they added the content guide on the top right, which literally gives you a waypoint to the closest thing, and you don't even have to look at the environment or anything anymore, which is honestly very much against the original statements that the devs were making about the game, about drawing your attention away from the UI. Suddenly they have this thing in there that just allows people to make beelines to all the locations without any thought. And that was an update that came to great applause. And obviously they felt the markets would respond to an update like that. And it's all just to lean more into world completion. And now this is what Guild Wars 2 is. But I do want you guys to think about a world in which that wasn't true. In a world in which the combat and the experience of leveling and how emergent and dynamic the dynamic events felt and the exploration felt, so they were all robust and strong enough experiences that just the pleasure of wandering around was the game for you, and obviously leveling as you went. You know, think of it as in a more sandboxy nature, and that was really the true thing I think that they were initially going for. And then maybe that explains some of the way that Queensdale works. And I know a lot of you guys will listen to me say that and think feel completely unconvinced. But it's kind of like the mindset you would have when you go to play Minecraft, for example. You don't need points of interest and vistas and hero challenges and hearts to enjoy Minecraft, because the core experience of Minecraft and what it means to explore there and gather things and get stronger and so on is really good, and it doesn't need that to prop it up. Guild Wars 2, over the later months, years of its development, realized that it wasn't strong enough, and it went for map completion. So in a weird way, I kind of regret that this is a huge focus in the game. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. And obviously, exploring in Guild Wars 2's open world has always been well complemented by most players. But I do find it interesting how certain elements of the game deteriorated and other ones kind of came forward. So yeah, this area of the map's probably the most boring part of the map to me. The Etten event that we did a minute ago, the heart, I should say, is cool, where you kind of get to read how the Etten feels, and then you have to decide whether you're going to be ferocious, charming, or dignified in your attempts to persuade them. It's one of the very few places left in the game where that mechanic actually means something. It obviously doesn't build into like an overarching personality for your character, and it doesn't, you know, affect things later than that. But it is fun to actually have to get into the minds of the Etin. You can do some real, like, very close to role-playing there in that. I tend to be very bad at it as well, for what it's worth. There's some good hidden stuff here, though. As boring as maybe the map completion side is, there's some good hidden stuff. There's that gate that you kind of have to emote to get inside. There's a painter, I think it is, sitting under a tree up on one of these hills. And if you emote in the right way at the painter, you'll get a nice little buff. I think it's a bit of health regeneration, is it maybe, or something, for a little while. Queensdale's full of this stuff. There's a cat on this map that if you zoom in close enough, you'll see it says burger on its collar. There's a little Yogi Bear Easter egg with a woman having a picnic and a bear comes and assaults her and you can take the bear out. There's a beautiful windmill that unfortunately you never really need to explore right near the start of the map. That's got so much incredible detail in it. Probably one of my favourite places in the whole game. But really is of no relevance to the personal story or to map completion. So guess what? Most players end up skipping it. And yeah, there's just kinds of all sorts of little things around in this area of the world. Because it was one of the first maps they ever made. So they really got to go very, very hard with it. Another map that's interesting in those terms is the Blaze Ridge Steppes, which we won't be looking at for a long time. But over in Blaze Ridge, it feels even weirder because for Queensdale, a lot of the very weird stuff, even though it was one of the first maps they made and therefore full of weird stuff, for Queensdale, a lot of the very weird stuff kind of ended up getting culled out. Because it is a starter map, so they need it to feel very consistent with the rest of the experience and be very careful about it. But over on Blaze Ridge, meanwhile, it's kind of a mid-game map. It's easily looked over. It's not probably had the same fine-tooth comb. So when you look at that one, there's all kinds of strange stuff that you can really, really, really sink your teeth into. So this area is also very interesting to me. The meta event, Battle for Beetleton. As it stands, Queensdale has a world boss and a big meta event, the Shadow Behemoth. But most maps do have two metas. And there were a lot of pre-release articles and discussion about this one here. So, in fact, both are up at once there. Look at that. We're right in the middle of Secrets of the Swamp and the Battle for the Beetleton. So, a player of Guild Wars 2 these days will not really recognize the Battle for Beetleton as anything great. In fact, you might even be hard-pressed to think of how many events are a part of it. Maybe you remember an event where a woman is at a vineyard and a ton of centaurs attack. Maybe you're vaguely familiar with the fact that one of these waypoints can be contested and things will assault it, but there's not much more going on there. Well, pre-release, they were talking about how this meta event would actually result in a full-fledged attack from the centaurs on Beetleton, and that the whole village of Beetleton, which is where the dungeon entrance is, could actually be a flippable location based on how well the meta event, the Battle for Beetleton, is going. So we have seen from the 2012 game that ArenaNet did experiment with these kinds of push-pull metas. The Harathi Hinterlands, also featuring the centaurs, was probably their best, realization of that idea, a big tug-of-war, where players have to flip the events rapidly before the centaurs flip them back. But I guess at some point, their ideas to have Beetleton itself be attacked fell away, and you won't actually find that in-game now. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's that they never implemented it, or they felt that one of the starter dungeons shouldn't be locked off. Because remember, they weren't scared to lock dungeons before. The personal story should lead you to the existence of the dungeons, and then dynamic events you kind of have to break your way through to get into the dungeons. So the three pillars of this game's PvE at launch, dungeons, dynamic events, personal story, they all kind of tie together. So that would happen at Ara, and that would happen outside the Crucible of... the Citadel of Flame? No, that's the Guild Wars 1 mission. Why do I always mess this up? No, it is the Citadel of Flame, right? I'm thinking of the Cathedral of Flame from Guild Wars 1. It happens there. It happens at the Crucible of Eternity. It happens in lots of the dungeons. But I guess they didn't want it happening at Beetleton anymore. Maybe because it was too early or something. I'm not sure. But I really, really wish that I had got to see the centaurs attacking. And nowadays, it's just kind of a weird meta that kind of doesn't exist. And maybe that's fine because there's already a lot going on in this map. Being a starter map, there's going to be a lot going on. Being a host to one of the better world bosses in the game, there's obviously going to be a lot going on. So, quite central to the map here now, we are at the vineyard. I've always liked this place. There's lots you can do in terms of talking to the NPCs and enjoying their company. You can get drunk here. The drunk effect in this game is not quite as good as the Guild Wars 1 drunk effect, but hey. The vineyard there as well is an example, again, of a place that you couldn't actually quite reach in Guild Wars 1. It was behind a wall, but we're kind of in the region of the Watchtower Coast at this point, I would say. This nice event here as well really doesn't have it much for you for map completion, because it's not in range of a heart, but that's actually a really nice long escort that eventually will take you to Beetleton. You can buy some eggs, I believe, which when you double click them, they pop out these little dancing mowers. One of the more fun consumables you don't see players messing with too much in the game these days. I guess a lot of people don't go there. I mean, in fact, look, in this footage, we walk over, we see the events primed and ready to go, but nobody's actually doing it. So yeah, it's just a nice big open fields. This section actually makes me think of Gendarim fields quite a lot. I guess it's all Kryta, so it all makes sense. More the territories of Lion's Arch around there, but hey. And we get to the waterworks, which also, you know, another highlight of Queensdale for me. The waterworks have those nice thin pipes, which even during map completion you might like to go into, where you can really crawl inside. There's a ton of ooze in there. I remember fighting those ooze for a long time, hoping for some good drops. I'm not sure I was doing a heart or what. But yeah, that was a nice exciting thing. This field where you could actually harvest the lettuce from and feel like a proper farmer. You got to remember, right at those release days when a lot of us were in Queensdale, lettuce might have actually been worth something, so there was a certain tingling excitement to actually travelling through and getting that. And so yeah, here we are, Beetleton, seat of Lord Caudicus Beetlestone. As far as the main story of the release game, this guy was considered the main competitor to the throne, I feel, to a certain degree. A lot of the personal story revolved around him and his association with seedy factions such as the bandits. The heart here itself is really not that interesting, but again, this is maybe a nice little look at the whole centaur assault thing. What are we pulling off of the walls here? Well, it's centaur graffiti, guys. Why is there centaur graffiti all over this town? Like, what's the cause of that? Because as far as Guild Wars 2 is actually released, you never see centaurs in here. But that's because the meta event, once upon a time, would have had this place flip. And then it makes sense that they're doing that they're putting that all up. And you can maybe come along and scrub it along. You've also got the wasp nests. The rats are a good little tip as well. It's easy to forget about the rats, but very often throughout world completion, if there's a rat around, you can auto-attack it or something. And you should be able to get a little bit of progress just from hitting them, as we can see here. There's also a lot of changes that have happened here over the years. I think this hero challenge never used to be this guy. Was that what it was? I think he was in the cage just off to the south, wasn't he? And we had to do something in there, or was that just an optional extra thing? But this is Carney Jeb. It's nice to see someone who's actually a little bit tanky here, even after all the power creep, and obviously has the stomps and the dazes and stuff. His mechanics actually could teach you a little bit about some of the enemies you're going to fight inside the dungeon, which is rather cool. I do get very nostalgic about these locations right outside of dungeons, where, yes, for a short period of time, there were a lot of people, actual players, that would gather and congregate around them, looking for teams and so on. Now you don't get that because of the LFG tool. A very familiar story to most MMOs, I would say. So here, as we actually completed the heart here, I think we did this really efficiently because we actually didn't have to speak to the children very much. But one of the other things is children, you know, shirking their duties and slacking off, and you want to convince them to actually get back to work. And they're hiding in various places behind the buildings and so on. Yeah, so assist Fisherman Will and the Fisherman of Beetleton. Just another kind of kill event. Don't like these very much. There's cages around. You open the cages. Enemies. Oh, no. This is the reverse. So at the start of the map, you open the... did you open the cages? Or did you lure things in up there as well? Well, in any case, we're going to be luring fish over to them and then trapping them, which is kind of a nuanced little interaction. I think a lot of players don't quite get to grips with. Or, as you can see, you can come around killing these scale. Being a Mesmer is quite nice here because the Greatsword autos have a nice range that allows you to poke enemies that would be legal for the heart, but had you gone over to melee them, you would have left heart range and not got any progress. Another interesting thing about map completion these days, where players are very fast. I'm not going to say it's because the game's less populated. To a certain degree, yes, I think the population has shifted to later game areas. But because players are so fast now, you're less likely to find players in the region of the hearts, which means that the NPCs can die more regularly. And you'll see a real big thing we've been able to take advantage of here is resurrecting NPC bodies, which gives you a lot of value. But back at launch, you know, only a couple of people would get that. It would be spread out over, you know, a seething population. And so that's kind of a weird way of speeding people up. I think the open world has another mechanic like that as well with the bonus experience. Here we go. So we're going to try and lure the crab over to the cage, and then you have to press F. It's always been kind of fiddly, honestly. But yeah, the bonus experience system where if you're the first person to kill an enemy in a while, you get a lot of bonus experience. Well, that's kind of a way of speeding players up out of low populated areas and into populated areas. I don't think any of that really matters for the way Guild Wars 2's ended up working and how little it cares about experience and stuff, but there was some logic to it back at release. So yeah, these guys are just super annoying. Invulnerable, they're crabs, so they have that annoying, like, sit still and block kind of animation. And especially frustrating since that was the last thing needed for the heart to actually be finished. Quite frustrating. So as you can see, we kind of did a big loop around the map. There, we've unlocked the Eastern Divinity Dam, which many years later we can actually explore from the other side in Lake Doric. But I guess it's kind of an interesting area in that that's one of those places that you don't actually have to unfog in order to get map completion. Most maps have like a place or two like that. And what it means is there's also some achievements in the game. Most people don't care about anymore because, as all achievements, they're account bound. So you kind of forget that they exist after a while. But there's achievements to fully unfog everything. They're basically this game's cartography achievements, cartography being a big part of Guild Wars 1. Cartography in this game's way easier, except when it comes to locations like that. Because you might have ran through, got 100% map completion, and to your mind, you're going to think, well, 100% map completion, I'm done. Not realizing that there's some little shard somewhere that you never quite tagged. I think there's actually a really good wiki page that lists all of those out, so that's quite nice. Over here, we've got a really cool place as far as the personal story is concerned. Lots of conspiracy and sneaky stuff. I've always liked seeing those moa in the pens there, one of each colour. And, wow, we've even pinged Phil Thackeray. That's nice. That's some good trivia there. So that guy is essentially like, I think when you speak to him, you're like, are you related to Logan Thackeray? And it's either that he's a really distant cousin, or he's not related at all. But there are weird little moments like that where, yeah, you, I think there's someone else in Gendaran Fields, isn't there? Who also might have been related to Logan. Something in my memory is getting jogged from that. Inside the bar is really nice there too. There's some good dynamic events that can trigger here to do with hunting boar around the wilderness. And if you wait in the bar long enough, you actually get to hear some nice dialogue from the characters as they're setting that up. I remember in the main Let's Play I did of the game, going through the personal story, sitting around in there and catching some nice ambient dialogue. As for the heart itself, it's pretty simple. Kill these things, prep traps. Another really easy way to get this heart, or the one nearby, is if a wasp queen spawns. The wasp queen phases every 25% health, and at the phases, it releases a ton of other bugs. And hitting all the bugs you can get heart credit from. So it tends to be done really quickly. It spawns right around here, but obviously we don't see anything. Also, in the original game, there was a big White Mantle watchtower in this area, but it's not here in the sequel, unfortunately. Don't really get to see it. One of the few places where we get to interact with Skrit now, though, over at the lumber mill, which is kind of a weird area. There's basically a big cave that, based on how the events are going, can actually have a complete cave-in, which is a nice idea, but there's also a weird thing that Arena have to do, which is that you can't get the players legitimately stuck, you know, in the cave-in. I think there's a way that you can stand just right in the rubble, such that it all collapses down around you and boxes you in. But there's an exit. That notwithstanding, there's an exit on the other side of the cave that you can just kind of walk in and out, so it doesn't really work. But there's some nice events about collapsing, stopping the script from coming out with that. Again, if any of the events trigger, you can pretty much just get the heart done straight away. I get the feeling that the devs were very concerned about these hearts taking too long, because if they did, I think it would become really transparent that essentially they're just like the standard fare of MMO grind quests, which this game was trying to move away from. And then these have been slapped on like a band-aid at the last moment. And, well, not the very last moment, but fairly late in. And we're kind of overtaking the experience of the game. What was originally going to be about emergent exploration and finding dynamic events that you weren't sure if they were there, now was just fill up this bar by killing X creatures, and you never want that. So here in the cave, you can actually see it was a very shallow cave. That's because the cave-in has occurred. And if we wanted to go into the main room, we'd actually have to find the alternate entrance off on the other side. Which maybe we're doing here. What are we doing? We're trying to climb up the rocks. I mean, I would have gone around on the right. I didn't actually realize you could climb this rock this high. I mean, with mounts, I'm sure so much of this stuff would get a bit broken and weird. We're just dropping in from the roof, are we? But what about full damage? Oh, are we trying to tag the some kind of map completion? Yeah, okay, no, we've just gone a weird way. All right, well, we're over at the Skaver Plateau now. Haven't actually finished that other heart. This is really weird. Because we're in range of the lumber mill heart, even though we're not really anywhere near the lumber mill now. So here's Chick the Windmill King. This is a weird fight that I think most players don't get anymore. But you notice around him, there's a ton of dynamic objects. The idea is that this guy will constantly push you away, and at vanilla balance that would have happened more. And you're supposed to use the environmental objects to defeat him. Because one of the systems the game was going to really be playing with was the idea that if you were fighting maybe with a chair, the chair leg would break off and you get a new weapon and you can emergently pick it up and you can use that. But that was one of those things that they never really played with too much. So here you go, this is the other entrance to the cave here. Right next to the Windmill King, I guess. And we actually managed to finish that heart there. So there's weird bits in Queensdale that are kind of teaching you about that mechanic, but then they don't come back. And nowadays, you do see that the kind of spirit of that experience in the game, but it's done through special action hotkeys more than anything else, right? If they want something to pop up and you've got this new tool you can use very briefly, say this happens a lot in fractals and raids, well, it will be a special action rather than a whole item. And I guess they kind of had to do that because when you get into like a 10-man scale or like crazy hectic light show explosions of effects stuff with 5-man content at the end, it's really hard to stop and take a breath and pause and enjoy the fact that you're holding a broken bottle or whatever. At the end of the day, it all just kind of becomes UI at that point. You're not examining your player model very well, and so yeah. And so now I guess we're back at Alterbrook Trading Post to finish this little bit of this heart, which we had missed before. Slightly inefficient, I suppose. Again, central to the map, but using the portals when we know that we're going to be zigzagging back and forwards is really rather nice. That leads us to the garrison. The garrison, which is a weird one because if you are a human character, you've already played inside the garrison, and so you might be confused, but when you very first come out to this map, you usually have the heart already, sorry, the waypoint here, already unlocked. And that's because you already came along and unfogged. The garrison went through a lot of changes. Now, there still is a sequence of dynamic events right here, which involves the centaurs attacking this. And you can see the drawbridge goes up, and you see they set up all these big trebs. It's really cool, but it's also extremely easy to beat and on a very low timer. So a lot of people don't get the pleasure of the centaurs actually attacking. Well, I say the drawbridge goes up. It's more that it's just a big door. I think the bridge is always actually there. They don't have, that's not a dynamic object or anything. But one consequence you will often see is once that event is succeeded, the Seraph will take some centaurs and throw them in the cages in this garrison. And you can go over and you can talk to them, and they want to be broken out. And then eventually they will get back out. But yeah, I wish the timers on this one were just a little bit faster so that more people could see that side. There's also a lot of really badass ambient dialogue from all these different pairs of soldiers. Like on the upper levels, see these unarmed Seraph catapults and stuff? If you go up there and you linger around enough, they talk about all manner of things. And in early development, this was, again, one of those bestiary locations. You could go to the tent over there and buy from a guy in the tent a little bit of information about the Hands of Olgoth, which was the original boss we fought in the tutorial. And there you go, though. With that heart and that vista, that is Queensdale complete. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this dive, this map completion. Thanks very much again to TechZoon. We'll be up with another clear very soon. We'll probably look at another starter map. Thanks, guys. See you next time.